more time on on tests as a technique for constructing measurement instruments, especially for you people in education. Tests are a major instrument that you use. Any questions on what we have talked about so far before I introduce my plan today is just to introduce you to concepts related to inferential statistics. What we have so far covered is about descriptive statistics. But as we started the course, we said that there are two types of statistics. There is descriptive statistics, which is intended to help you describe what you have found in a study. But then if you use the sampling, if your interest is to study a particular population, but because the population is too big, you can't study each and every element. Normally we sample from that population to study the sample. So when you do descriptive statistics, you are just describing what you have found in the sample. But your interest is to talk about the population. So for you to be able to talk about the population, then you have to use inferential statistics to move from the sample to the population. That's what I want to talk about today. But so far, having talked about descriptive statistics and measurement, any questions? So you want some to have more understanding on standard scores. Okay. Another question? Correlation. What specific areas of? Okay. Okay. Any specific questions about standard scores? We said that standard scores are used when you are trying to make comparisons of distributions, or if you have one test and you want to compare with another test, then the best way to be able to do that is to convert your scores, the raw scores, into standard scores. Then you can be able to compare directly from one test to another. That's basically the reason why we worry about standard scores. And in most statistical procedures,
Okay, so in the previous lesson,
we are
we picked up from
involved with situations where we want to be comparing
the environmental
one
conservation and
distribution
control,
to another
and
distribution,
we're looking at several
one
aspects of
variable to
environmental
another
conservation and
variable.
control. So
Like
in
the
this
correlation
prospects,
procedures
I will
we've been
not
talking
go over
about.
this again
It's actually
when I start
comparing
to talk about the
one
revision
variable
part
with
of
another variable.
this
If
course.
you change
So you should be able to distinguish
in one
environmental
variable, is that
conservation and
change
environmental control.
going to be associated
So we
with change
talked
in another
about the
variable?
key
So
aspects
such
of
questions
environmental conservation and control, which
require
are
you to first
specifically
convert your
8
scores
areas.
into standard scores.
So in
that
those
you can
8
compare them
areas, you will notice in the notes that there
So that's
are
the reason
areas
why
of focus under each
we
aspect.
worry
So for
about
example, on the sustainable resource management, we
conducting
have sustainable agriculture, forestry,
converting scores
and
into
fisheries.
standard
So in
scores,
explanation, these should focus
and
on
we have
how
a
sustainable
formula
resource management
which
can
we
be
normally
done
use
as an
to
idea
convert
for
raw
environmental
scores
conservation.
to
So
standard
moving
scores.
forward,
If
we have discussed the issues of
in the
environmental
raw
conservation.
scores you
However,
have
we have
computed the mean
challenges
of those
in
scores,
environmental conservation.
and you have
So the key to
computed
the challenges
standard
to
deviation
environmental
of those
conservation and
scores. Then you
control
can convert
is
them
that we are
into
having
standard
problems with
scores
addressing
using the formula
ways in which we
talked about.
can manage resources, and also we can manage environmental related challenges. So the key areas, there are 2 specific areas. The first is the resource overexploitation. So resource overexploitation is very challenging to environmental conservation because firstly, when you look at deforestation as the first area, deforestation occurs because mainly with human activities. You have to clear down forests for agriculture, you have to clear down the forest for urban expansion, and because of these, and also because of economic activities such as, for example, papers are made out of trees, and there are a lot of other products that are made out of trees. So because of these economic activities, it threatens biodiversity and contributes to climate change. So when we cut down the trees, we are reducing the carbon sink. And the second overexploitation is the overfishing that occurs. So we look at the prospects of sustainable development where there is a goal on life underwater. So many of the world's fish stocks are exploited beyond the sustainable levels, and this leads to decline in the species population and disrupts the marine ecosystem. So in order to address this, there has to be mechanisms to create policies and also tax regulations on overfishing. So for example, akakoda weza wambiri nsomba boma limatsika nyanja oti anthu asawezeso nsomba for commercial purposes. And we also have marine extraction. So mining activities, especially for precious minerals, can cause habitat destruction, water pollution, and also create social conflicts over land use. Primarily, when you are looking at social countries where they are abundant in natural resources, they experience a lot of conflicts between tribes within the areas where some tribes have control over the areas that have the abundance in natural resources. So this creates challenges transformed into zero natural environmental conservation. And the second aspect is climate change.
Is always transformed into 1.
So the reason why climate change is a factor in terms of challenges towards environmental conservation is because we are already experiencing climate change. And many of the climate change effects, they are beyond human control.
And that's why,
for example, the
worrying about
extreme
all this
temperatures,
is to be able to compare. So if you have transformed all the scores in one variable into standard scores,
what about
you have transformed
the people,
all the scores in another variable into standard scores.
They experience a lot of rise in temperatures. So this causes melting of ice caps and changes in weather patterns disrupt the ecosystem. So for example, when there are cyclones and so on, it also affects the natural ecosystem.
Your
and
scores
moreover,
are
the climate change shifts habitat. So as
Like,
temperatures
can I
rise,
use
some
this?
species are forced to migrate to new areas, often leading to conflicts with human settlements or other species as well.
If they are
Moreover, the
distributed
issues of climate
normally,
change affect the
and we say the
agricultural productivity.
normal distribution is a distribution
So
where
agricultural productivity is
this
particularly
half
important in
is
environmental
exactly the
conservation
same as this
because
half.
we use a lot of land for
Having
agricultural
transformed the
productivity, and
scores into
areas
standard
that are
scores,
least
then
economically
your
developed, they
mean
rely so much on
is
agriculture.
going to
So with the
be
effects of climate change,
zero.
they experience more challenges
And
in
any
addressing
scores
environmental
falling
conservation.
from the mean,
So the local
below the
communities
mean,
play a significant role
all the scores
in
which will
environmental
fall
conservation.
between
So indigenous
the
communities
mean
act
and
as
one
stewards
standard
for the
deviation
land
below
and have a
the mean
historical significance towards environmental
will
conservation.
constitute
So this is through the indigenous knowledge or traditional
34%
knowledge, as some call
of
it,
your
of
population.
land management, sustainable
The number of
harvesting,
scores which will
wildlife
fall
protection, and so
between the
on.
mean
So in many cases,
and one standard
policies
deviation
now
above the
aim to
mean
integrate indigenous knowledge with
will also
complementary
constitute
conservation science. So indigenous knowledge is
34%.
particularly important with environmental
Okay?
conservation because mainly in underdeveloped countries, a
Scores
lot
falling
of the
between
community are
one standard deviation
the people
above
in
the
the rural
mean
areas
and two standard
and
deviations
who
above the
don't have
mean
access
will
to
constitute
resources, science, and so on. So the
30.59.
indigenous knowledge plays a significant role in addressing environmental
This is
conservation,
34,
particularly when you're looking at deforestation,
34.
you are
This is
looking at
34 point
sustainable
something,
agricultural practices, even
similarly here,
natural resource extraction, or even fishing
minus
itself.
two standard
So local communities
deviations
play a
will
significant
be
role. So in
30
conclusion, environmental conservation and control
So,
is essential
with
in
this kind of
preserving the natural
distribution,
ecosystem for the future generation.
you
So the effective strategies on
compare
that include
any
sustainable resource management, policy enforcement, and global cooperation.
distributions, any
So that concludes on
that have those
environmental
standard
conservation and
scores
control.
equally.
So the other area
It
of
doesn't
environmental
matter.
conservation and
Sometimes
control that
you
we're
have
going to look
that,
at is the role of
you know, that's
indigenous
a
knowledge.
normal
Now we are going
deviation,
to
but
focus
sometimes you
on the
have
indigenous knowledge
a normal
aspect in
deviation which
addressing
is flat,
environmental conservation.
like that.
So
As long
sometimes,
as
as I pointed out, it is called
it's a normal
traditional knowledge.
distribution.
At some point, it is called
It
indigenous
only
knowledge.
says that
Indigenous
the
knowledge
standard
plays a
deviation
significant
was
role in environmental
larger.
conservation.
The
So
scores
it is
were falling
indigenous because
further
it is a
apart,
body of knowledge
but
often
still
passed down orally
34,
from
34.
generation to generation. So it
30,
encompasses practical skills,
80.
understanding
And that's why you can
that
compare this with
evolved
that,
over
despite
a long period of time
having slightly
concerning
different
their
shapes.
local environment. So when you look at indigenous knowledge,
Okay.
it is particularly important because every community has, over a period of time, consolidated different practices, knowledge, and understanding about their local communities. Because of that, they are able to
That's what
live
I'm saying.
coexisting within the
The mean is
natural
always
environment
zero,
and
the
not
standard deviation is
disturbing the
always
ecosystem.
1.
So indigenous knowledge contributes to environmental conservation on several accounts.
This is
The
another
first
way
is
of
through
presenting
holistic
the
view of
discourse,
nature.
where
Indigenous
you
knowledge
are
brings in
worried of
together
describing people
how human beings and the
by
rest of the
negatives.
ecosystem can live
Let's say you have a
harmoniously.
class,
So
these are
it
scores from
plays
a class,
as
and
how
in the
human
class the
beings are
mean
part
was
of the natural
66,
ecosystem,
but somebody
and
got
they have to engage in the
55.
activities taking into
So his scores are going
consideration
to be
all
down
the
this way.
species, the land
Okay, down this way
animals,
you are saying
plants, as
minus,
well as the
minus,
aquatic
minus. So instead of
animals.
saying
So
minus,
nature is not
you
seen
could
as
add
a
a
resource
10
for
to all the
exploitation,
scores,
but
so
rather
that you are positive,
living
but you
entity in
understand
which
that is
human
below
beings
the mean.
must exist. Because of this, it leads to conservation practices that aim to maintain environmental equilibrium. So when you are looking at, when we go back to the
And
environmental
that concept of
conservation
standard
mechanisms,
scores
such as sustainable
is what
agriculture
also
or
brings
sustainable
us to
fishing,
correlation.
this holistic
Because in
view of
correlation,
indigenous knowledge
you're
allows for the
comparing
communities to
two
exist
distributions.
with
You want to
the natural
assess
environment
the
without
association
depleting
of
resources.
one
And number
variable
two is
to
sustainable
another
agricultural practices.
variable. So you are
Indigenous knowledge often
doing
includes sustainable
comparisons of
agricultural
variables.
practices that have been refined
If
over centuries. So it includes keeping
students
cultivation,
perform high
agroforestry, and terracing.
mathematics,
So, for
they achieve
example,
high scores in mathematics.
building terraces on slopes to prevent,
Are they also
soil
going to achieve
erosion
the high
and
scores in
conserve
English?
water. So when you are looking at terracing,
you're
it
comparing
is
mathematics and
prominent in areas
two variables.
that have got sloping
low
land
performers
practices.
in
It is
mathematics,
different from areas
also
that
low performers in
we
English,
can call it flat
high
areas,
performers in
or
mathematics,
areas
also
that
high
have got
performers in
hills.
English. Then you need
And number 3 is biodiversity
this concept.
conservation. So many indigenous communities are
correlation
stewards of
basically
biodiversity. This is because the traditional territories often
assessing
overlap
that kind
with
of
some of the
relationship
world's
between pairs of
biodiverse
crops.
regions. So it includes using diverse crops
If you
and
change
livestock for breeding,
in one variable
identify and protect
occurs,
key species,
is that going
and
to
employ traditional
influence change
medicinal knowledge.
in another variable?
So you'd find that in
If you
several
increase
indigenous areas, they'll use
scores
traditional
in
medicine
English,
to
is
address
that going
challenges,
to
for
be
example,
associated
in
with the
agriculture,
increased
in
scores
other
in
illnesses,
mathematics?
and so on. So this creates sustainability of the ecosystem living
And we said that
coexisting
one
with the
way
natural
of doing
environment.
this.
And number 4 is water conservation and management.
Whereby
So I expressed that in a lot of communities, like they are living in areas of high stress, high water stress. So there are some communities that have lived in areas of high water stress for a very long time, and because of this, they developed or collected a body of knowledge that gives them an understanding of how the water cycle works. So it includes how to manage water in ways to reduce waste and to ensure its availability throughout the year. So practices such as building rainwater harvesting systems or maintaining wetlands are crucial for areas facing water scarcity. So in some communities using sustainable agricultural practices, they mulch their agricultural area, the area where they
we'll be looking at if you have
they plant crops and so on. So when they do that, it ensures that
one
the
exam in
moisture
English,
is
one
retained
exam
in the
in
water,
mathematics,
and moisture is retained in the land, and they use less water for agriculture.
So a student who has
and number 5 is fire management.
Here,
so in some cultures, controlled burning is used to manage forest ecosystem. So that is through indigenous fire management techniques. Often prevent large-scale distributed wildfire by clearing underbrush and promoting healthy growth in the forest.
Maybe 70%.
The indigenous knowledge would be there only in areas that have got higher densities of forests, as opposed to areas that are more flatland and don't have prevalence of forests. And number 6 is wildlife conservation and protection of sacred sites. So many indigenous cultures have taboos and spiritual beliefs that protect certain areas and also certain species. So sacred groves, their forests, rivers, as well as mountains that are protected against human interference.
Now, when you
so these areas serve as natural conservation zones, preserving biodiversity and ecosystem. So you'd find that in some communities, the communities engage harmoniously with areas to protect those sacred sites because of spiritual beliefs. So in the long run, you find that even policies that bring up development in a country will go away from the areas that have been protected by the community. And number 7 is climate change adaptation. So indigenous knowledge has been instrumental in helping communities adapt to impacts of climate change. So in many communities, they have developed an understanding of the early warning signs of natural disasters. So that includes things such as floods or droughts. And they also prefer during those times when they have those warning signs to use drought-resistant crop varieties and traditional irrigation systems. So, for example, when there's that information on droughts, they are going to opt to engage in agricultural practices of crops that are drought resistant as opposed to those that require a lot of water. And seasonal calendars that guide planting, harvesting in accordance with environmental change. So when you look at indigenous knowledge, it allows for rural communities to engage in agricultural practices without necessarily gaining knowledge from the agricultural science community. After
that
gathering
association
all
which
the
is not being
indigenous
explained
knowledge
before
on practices
is
of,
this one.
for example, the seasonal calendars,
This
the
one
early warning signs,
should have been
and
on the
various
main line,
agricultural practices that are
but he has fallen
beneficial
off the
to
main
that
line.
specific area, they are
So
still
it
able
means
to
there is some
engage
degree of
in agriculture
variance
and bring
occurring
off higher
the main
yields,
line.
even when there is impact on climate
It
change.
means there is another variable,
And number 8 is
which is
community-based
not
natural
in this
resource
model.
management. So in many indigenous
Explaining for that, and
communities,
you don't know it
resource
as
management
a
is
research.
communal rather than
So
so because of this, the
closer
decision on land
these
use,
scores
water,
fall
as
to
well
the
as
mainland,
forest, is usually
the
made collectively,
stronger
and it reduces
the
the
association.
overexploitation,
The
taking
further
into account
away
how they need
these scores
to
fall from the main line,
maintain
the
these
weaker
resources for the future generation,
association. So
and
that's one
understanding
story
the benefits are
you can talk
usually
about.
shared. So this collective
The
approach
closer
helps
they fall to the
prevent
line,
overexploitation
the stronger.
and long-term
The weaker
sustainability.
they fall
And
to the line,
number 9 is indigenous legal
the
framework.
further they fall
So in
from the
many
line, the
underdeveloped
weaker
countries,
the
there is
association.
the
That's one
traditional
story.
system
But
that
you have not finished telling
is
us the
followed
story
by
you need to
many
tell
rural
us
people,
on
even in
correlation.
urban areas,
The other story
where
you
when
need to
there
tell
are
us
when there are
is
disputes, it
what
goes through the
direction
traditional
of
leaders.
this
So
association.
because of this,
If you
there's
look
a
at
legal
this,
framework
the
to
way I've
address
plotted this,
indigenous
it shows
related
that
issues.
generally,
So indigenous communities
when
often have customary
the
laws and
scores are increasing
practices
this
that
way,
govern the use and protection
generally
of
they are
natural
also
resources.
increasing this
And
way.
because of this,
That's why
the community
this plot is going that way.
engages in practices
You could
to
have had
control the
another
environmental
situation
related distraction.
where
And these legal systems, although informal, can be highly effective in conservation because
good one
they are
is
deeply rooted in the
this
conservation culture and
waste
also enforced
by
through
subtraction
social norms.
and the one.
So having looked at
You could also
how
have had a
indigenous
situation
knowledge
where
can be used for environmental
the scores
conservation, there are
are
also
taking
challenges related
this kind of
to how
relationship.
the integration
Still
of
there is that
indigenous knowledge
imaginary
to environmental
mainline,
conservation.
but some are
So
falling off
the first challenge
from that
is
mainline.
that there's
But
lack
here,
of recognition.
as the scores are
So
increasing
a
this
lot
way,
of scientific knowledge looks at
scores this way
indigenous
are
knowledge as
decreasing.
not having
High
enough
scores
backing towards
in
environmental
English
conservation.
are
So
associated
because
with
of
low
this,
scores in
it
mathematics.
is undervalued by
High
governments
scores
and
in mathematics
scientists
are
when they are
associated with low
developing
scores
policies to address
in
environmental
English.
conservation.
So when you
And
have
also there is
this
loss
type
of
of
knowledge. As I expressed that it
scatterplot,
is usually passed on orally
we talk
from
about this as a
generation to
negative
generation.
association. And this one as a
When younger
positive
generation move from
association.
from
And
an urban
that's
area to adopt modern
now
way
if
of
you
life,
talk about the
usually the
strength
traditional knowledge
and the
in
direction,
many accounts it is
you are
lost.
done talking
And
about
also the land rights
correlation.
issues. So this
Now
is
the
common
question
in
would
countries
be,
where
why do
there
you
is an
think
infiltration of
there's
the
a strong association?
transnational
Why do you think
companies. So
the
those
association
industries
is
that go
negative? Or
in
why do you think
areas
it is
of
positive?
high
Now that
agricultural
is your
productivity,
discussion. That is your
normally the
description
government will just
as to
sell that
how we
area
understand
to
the type
that
of variables.
transnational company,
But the
and
correlation
the community
analysis
faces challenges in
will tell you
securing
those two
rights to
stories.
their ancestral land. So this
And then
makes
we
it
said
difficult
that
for them to
whilst we
maintain
can talk
traditional
about the strength
practices
of
when they
association,
move to another
by the way the
area.
scores are falling to one
And
another,
because of this, there
but
is
you cannot
also
be
a role
very
in which
precise. To be
indigenous knowledge
precise,
can play in
then you need to
Malawi's
use the
environmental conservation.
correlation
So in Malawi,
coefficients.
like any other parts of
And
the world,
correlation
indigenous knowledge is
coefficients
crucial to
are
rural environmental
mathematical
management,
techniques
such
of
as soil and
assessing this
water
very same
conservation through traditional agricultural
association.
practices like the use
So
of vetiver grass
that
to control erosion. So this is very common in rural communities
we talked
as a
about
method of traditional agricultural practices and community-based conservation
we'll come back
programs
to
where
that.
local people
But let
take
me talk about
responsibility for
one of the
managing
correlation
forest and
coefficients
wildlife
is
reserves.
called product moment
So, as
correlation
a
coefficient.
summary in explanation of
And
these
this
key
one
areas,
is only
the challenges and the
computed
role of Malawi's
when the true
environmental
variables you are
conservation,
comparing
as well as the
are
areas
all
in which
measured in the
indigenous
ratio
knowledge can
scale.
address environmental conservation, it is important to acknowledge the value
Its
of
formula is
indigenous
that one.
knowledge in the modern
And
conservation
if you look at
strategy.
this formula,
So, in looking
you
at these
notice
case
that
studies,
our
we
story
are able
about
to integrate
Z-scores
indigenous knowledge
has
into
come back
official
because it is
environmental
saying
policies or
the sum
grassroots
of
initiatives when would
Z
be
scores
a valuable
of X
approach. So, for
multiplied by
example,
Z scores
the
of
policies
Y
in agriculture have streamlined the use of vetiver grass in many
divided by the
areas
number
to
of
control
pairs
erosion, and
of
also
these scores
accommodate
would be
the local communities to be
correlation
part of the
coefficient.
community-based conservation
So we are using
programs. So this
what you were asking
concludes
about.
the areas,
Why?
the rest
Because
of
we're
the course.
comparing two
We have looked
variables.
at a lot of
Okay.
topics. However, in the context of the up and coming exams, there are areas
Then
of
we talked
revision
about
that we can look at. So those are the key
another
areas.
correlation coefficient, which is the rank
We
correlation
have the environmental
coefficient.
impact assessment,
If your
policy and sustainable development,
scores
the
are
laws,
measured
looking
in
at Agenda
ordinal,
21 and job break plan of
then the sort of
implementation,
correlation coefficient you have to
environmental
use
conflict, environmental
is
conservation and
Spearman
control, and
Role.
indigenous knowledge. So as you
Because
see with these topics, these are just the areas that we
measures
covered after mid-semester.
its formula
So
uses
before I start to go on, for example, some of the
idea
areas
of
that we've covered later on before this time, you can
those
always
orders.
look at
It looks at
and tell me an area where you had
differences
challenges.
between
That way we can also concentrate on that.
Why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that. It uses the differences
And
between
the job break plan of implementation.
ranks for you to assess the Spearman Role.
All of these areas where Maisoga.
That time I shared the formula of
Policy and sustainable
RAW.
development and sustainable development law agenda 21 and JPY.
Which we said that the Spearman Role is equals 1 minus 6 d squared divided by n multiplied by n squared minus 1. That's the formula for Spearman Role. And the D here are the differences. If in mathematics,
So the other thing that
John
is not
was
there,
number
the
one.
sustainable leadership is also part of the exam.
In mathematics, but number 7 in English. So 1 minus 7 is equal to minus 6.
Okay, so we can start on the role
if
of
James
policy and laws
was
development.
Number 8 in mathematics.
So this topic
but number 3
makes reference to Agenda
in English.
21.
So 8
As,
minus 3.
I explained that Agenda 21
is that
builds on the governing capacity of every country, especially those that are developing, in a way that is effective in the ability to govern related.
I'm talking about positions of the students now.
So Agenda 21 provides capabilities,
but from the raw marks, you could
three
use
specific areas.
Pearson
Basic objectives for development, as well as
then if your variables are
effective
measured
legislation in regards to the objectives related to sustainable development.
We said
so these objectives
I
also
talked about other
methods of administration and management,
for coming up with correction
and lastly, law enforcement and mechanisms, including periodic checks on their
measure you use.
So you see that these three areas are ways in which the Agenda 21 has given governments the capabilities to address sustainable development related to how they are facing challenges in their own country.
in another
Agenda
area.
21 is an
you can't
international
use
concept,
these
but
mathematical
countries have to
procedures.
develop
The sort of mathematics
policies
there is
and legislation
assessment of the
related to what they are
proportions.
experiencing. So they
think
make
that's what they
reference
talk about.
to Agenda 21.
We went further though to say that
So we first of all
sometimes
look at the role,
might have
the policy and regulation. So I explained that
an
in order
association
for sustainable development to really be
which looks
engaged,
like
policy and regulation
this.
is important, particularly because we are looking at
Remember
sustainable
that,
development that is being
What did you call
derived
this
from consumption,
kind of association?
right? It is being driven from
Gathering.
consumption, and I expressed
Yeah.
in that lesson that
Oh,
there are
this
three mechanisms that
still
affect
gathering.
that consumption affects. We look at the social
First,
reason,
it starts with the
environmental
increasing,
impact,
in this variable
and
associated with
also
increasing that variable
the economic
up
impact
to a
of consumption.
point. Then the association changes.
So this gives
Decreasing,
a narrative of how
decreasing,
the policy and regulation is coming in.
This one
They are
started
coming
with
in because of the environmental impact
increasing.
that
Now
is
it has
related to
changed
the country's
to
effects. So we look at the
increasing,
environmental impacts, for
decreasing.
example. I expressed
Okay.
that consumption plays a significant role
Then
in
if you have that
environmental
kind of
challenges because
association,
it not
instead of
only
using Pearson
distracts
R,
the habitats, it
you
loses
use
it causes loss to biodiversity,
correlation,
soil degradation as the first factor in resource extraction, right? We are looking at how the environment is affected
further
by consumption
advancement
from
of
resource
plant
extraction,
is
and
where
secondly
here,
from
all
the
these
process of
examples I've
manufacturing.
given, you're
So
comparing to
the
variables,
companies
right?
expel a lot
But
of gases,
sometimes you may
and
have to
also
compare
as consumers,
one variable with three
we also
other variables.
we have to leave out garbage
one
in the
variable
consumption
with
that we
five
see.
other
So you can
variables.
see that the
you
environment is
talk about
impacted by consumption through, first of
multiple
all, the initial
correlation.
process of
In the process of
resource
multiple
extraction,
correlation,
through
there
the
is
manufacturing
partitioning out
process,
of the
and
correlation
further
coefficient,
after
where
the resources
there is
have been
partial
used
correlation
by the
within the
household.
same
So on these three
model.
accounts is the
And when you
explanation
hear
of
about
the
people
environmental
talking
impact,
about a
and you
regression
should be able to
analysis,
explain
it's basically
these specific areas.
assessing
So
one
that,
variable
according to this, includes
with a
areas such as
more
fast fashion. And in the
multiple
previous lesson, I
regression
gave you an
analysis.
example of Mena Makali akaunjika, right? In a lot of underdeveloped countries, timatenga akaunjika. So akabwera mabelo aja mupezeko zinthu zina sizoti anthu angagule, sangavale. So
just revision.
sizingagulisidwe and they end up just throwing them anywhere. So when you are looking at Jovala, kuti chipange biodegrade, they end up
the
polluting water bodies and also the land areas.
You need
and
to know
another
them.
Significant area is the single-use plastic.
In your own
so
life,
in
when
this,
you are doing
you
your
should
own
be able to remember how we
them,
talked about the Malawian environmental policy. We looked at how the country banned the use of single-use plastics because of the element of consumption and how it is polluting.
Principles.
And we also look at the social impact of consumption.
The principles,
so in this, it is just explaining socially what is consumption causing to the individual. So that includes poor working conditions and unfair wages. So this is coming in because companies want to increase their productivity.
Notes.
Of this. Per hour, not profit. So they choose to pay people unfair wages, and they don't invest in proper working environment, including the working condition itself.
I shared all the notes up
and
to
finally, the economic impact. The economic impact is coming in because if we are over-consuming, we are not doing it in a sustainable manner that is going to affect our ability to extract the resources when we want to continue the economic
sorry, I'm saying unit 4, no, unit 3. You have not
so, unit 3. Sustainable consumption practices offer opportunities such as innovation and job creation as well as economic diversification. So if we don't look at the effects of consumption, we are able to drive ways in which we can address the overconsumption as they are challenging economic impacts. So the role of government policy in sustainable consumption. There are tools for promoting sustainable consumption. The key there are the taxes and the levies, the subsidies and the incentives, the regulation as well as standards, public procurement policies, information and labeling schemes. So these are
So-
tools that are used by governments and international cooperation to address the issue of sustainable development. And through that, there are also successful studies, successful case studies on policy intervention.
Very
So it's
briefly,
making reference to how different countries have been able to implement strategies to address sustainable consumption as well as sustainable
inflation
development.
statistics, like the statistics used to
Okay, so
help
now
a
looking at Agenda
researcher
21.
to infer
When we
his
make
or her
reference,
findings
having that
from
as
a
a starting
sample
point to the Agenda 21, making reference to
the
how
population.
we address sustainable development using policies
and
and
in
the
this
laws. So the Agenda
unit, what I
21,
want
as I
you to know
expressed, gives a framework
is
for
why do
governments
we
to
conduct
address their problems.
inflation
So the
statistics?
key area of Agenda 21 has
This we will
problems
not have time
address
to cover
problems
this.
that are faced by
I'll
the
just
world,
show you some
and
examples.
also how we are going to address these problems
Later on
as we
in
go
life,
along.
you
So first of all,
deal
it
with
reflects
that.
on global consensus, political commitments, and also
so as I
environmental
said,
cooperation.
descriptive statistics helps you to
And
organize,
after
summarize
reflecting on these global
in order
issues,
to describe
it provides a
observations
mechanism
made in a
for
study.
successful
But
implementation,
if you have used a
and
sample,
provides or
you want
creates a
to
focus
those findings you
for
have made in the
responsibilities of
sample,
governments
you
in
need to
addressing
refer
environmental
them to
cooperation
the
and
population.
developmental challenges. So
And
that is
for you to
through
do that,
the national
you need,
strategies that every country
inflation
must have
statistics.
related to the challenges that they have in their country, the plans as well as the policies, and gain international
we are talking about the
cooperation
inflation
to support
statistics,
and supplement the national efforts. So for example, like
you need to
Malawi
appreciate
does not have the financial muscle to address many of the
various
sustainable
types of
development efforts,
research,
but
which
there
we
is
talked about
relevant international cooperation
third year.
in relation to the
We
areas
talked about
of priority
descriptive
in our country.
research,
So we have
and
various
we talked
projects, for
about
example, in
experimental
agriculture.
research,
We have them in
where in
gender
experimental research we
equality, in
that
economic
you
activities,
want
and
now
so
to
on.
assess
So there are
the
many international corporations that are
cause-effect
coming in
relationship,
to address these
causal
issues.
relationship,
So they are not just coming
not
in
just association.
without a context,
The
but rather
context
it is coming in
change
from the
in one
Agenda
variable
21.
being caused by
So each
change in another
international
variable.
cooperation brings
So
in their strategies related
that
to what
involves
has been stipulated in the
hypothesis
Agenda
testing,
21, and
it
therefore
involves
it is integrated
doing
with
an
a country's
experiment.
policy. So,
And
for
we talked
example,
about
an
the
institution
three
such as
characteristics of experiments.
Food and Agriculture
That
Organization,
an experiment
it has its presence in
must
every country.
have
Komano
control.
abapanga ama policies out to address ma challenges amena abeza.
It must
Ama ina
have
kuti they have to integrate the
manipulation,
international policy through Agenda 21
and it
and
must
those
have
policies that have been
observation.
formulated by the
talk about
national
control,
governments. So Agenda 21,
you should
in
be able
regards
to
to law and
hold all
policy,
variables
looks at
constant,
4 specific
except
areas.
the variable
First of all,
which you
it
are
develops
interested
international law on sustainable
The
development.
variable you are manipulating
So
should
that
be
is
the only
through special
variable
attention
influencing
to
the
balance
association
between environment and development.
of
That's
that
the
variable
first thing
and the dependent
that
variable.
governments take
Otherwise,
out from
the
Agenda
dependent
21.
variable should not be influenced
The
by
second
other
is
variables.
clarify and strengthen
Otherwise, you
relationship
cannot be
between
explained-
existing
be able to explain what is
international
happening.
instruments or agreements in the field of environment
third
and related
characteristic
socio-economic
is you
agreements.
should be able
So this is making
to
reference to how
observe
Agenda 21
the effects
should
of your
not supersede
manipulation
the Kyoto Protocol
on the
or
dependent variable.
the
So in other
Beijing
words, you are
Agreement,
manipulating
nor the Paris
the
Agreement
independent
as
variable,
examples, but rather they
and
should
you
just
are trying to
strengthen
see
these international
how is that
agreements
manipulation
related to sustainable development
the dependent
and
variable.
provide developing countries with technical assistance. This is very important as a factor in the Agenda 21,
If, for example,
because they understand that a lot of developing countries
wanted
and
to
underdeveloping
assess
countries are the ones that are
effect
hardest
of
hit
various
by environmental
teaching
challenges.
techniques
So in providing them
on
with technical
students' performance
assistance,
in
it enhances
mathematics.
their national
So
capabilities,
performance
for
in
example, in
mathematics becomes
legislation
your
and also in
dependent
field
variable,
of environmental law and
and your
implementation
independent
practices.
variable
And
is
finally,
teaching
to integrate
techniques.
environment and developmental issues.
So you as a
national,
scientist
sub-regional, regional, as well as
can
international.
manipulate the
So what
teaching
Agenda
techniques.
21 as
You
a final
have
prospect
a group
talks
of
about
students,
is how
teach them
there has to
using
be an,
different techniques.
an integration
And as you are
between
changing
the
the techniques,
international
you are
policies that have
observing
been made.
how
For example,
the
as Agenda
achievement
21,
in
and
mathematics
at the regional level, for
so that
example,
you can
African
say
Union
this teaching technique
makes
is
a
effective.
policy for the
It
entire
makes the
Africa,
students
and
achieve
then we
much
have
better
Sub-Saharan
than this
Africa
other
that has
teaching
got its
technique.
own policies related
So when
to
I'm saying
improving
manipulation,
environmental sustainability.
you
And as
manipulating
Malawi,
the
we should
teaching
also integrate
techniques.
all these policies
And you
when
are
we are
observing
addressing environmental
the effect of
sustainability
that
and also
on
creating those laws.
student achievement.
So the reason why there has to be this
Is that
national,
making sense?
this integration is the fact that
And when
environmental
you are talking about
challenges,
control,
they cross borders.
when
So
you
for
are manipulating
example,
teaching techniques, there should not be other variables conceivable that would affect student achievement. You know,
how are
student
we going to
achievement
develop
can be
policies to
affected
ensure
by
that these products that
environment, right?
we are exchanging, for example, does not harm
the
one
classroom
country
is
and
not like
affect the
this
other?
one,
And also
where this
in
both
regards to
sides there
things
is
such
no
as
window,
pollution control
and here
and over
very well
exploitation.
ventilated.
So that is the reason why
This is a classroom which
integration has to be
has
made.
windows both sides. Students in
So
the
that
classroom
was
with
Agenda
windows both
21.
sides may be better
And
than in
the
this class,
second
because
policy on
here
sustainable development law
very likely
is
students
the
might be
World
dozing
Summit on Sustainable
as they are being
Development,
taught.
which is
So they
the
might miss
JOBEC
some of the
plan
things.
for implementation. So the
The
JOBEC
teaching
plan for
technique,
implementation has
if
five
it is also
specific
affected by the
strategies.
type of teachers.
The
If
first
the
is
teachers are
improve
different
interaction and
and they have different
collaboration
abilities
with
to teach,
stakeholder relationships
that can also affect
and
achievement
networks
rate.
among
So
research
instead of you
institutions,
assessing
government
only the teaching
agencies,
technique,
and private
it might also
sector.
be confused by the way
In
the
regards to
teachers are
sustainable
performing.
development law,
So you want to
they have
hold
to look at this
constant.
collaboration because this is
Maybe
the
use
only
one
way
teacher,
that
but
various
teaching
countries can address
the different
sustainable
teaching
development
techniques.
through integrating
Then
their law practices.
teacher effect
Osatukabira dziko ili
will
au
not
gamba
be
zina,
an
on the
issue
same
because
issue.
the same
There has
ticket,
to be an integration. That way,
and they are
a
only
country,
observing
for
the teaching
a
technique.
specific region,
That's
has got
what
laws
they're
that
referring to as
are
control.
backed by
And
the same
observation in this
framework.
regard,
And
you
number two
conduct
is
a
assist
test,
developing countries
you see how
in
the
building
students are
access
performing.
to larger share of multilateral and
that
global
performance
research.
you are observing.
So this is coming in through the JOBEC plan of implementation because they identified the challenges in capacity building in underdeveloped countries. Because when you are looking at, let's say, in research
So
of
there
sustainable
are various
development,
steps
Simupeza, let's say, and
for conducting
Malawi, in many underdeveloped countries that are
research.
part of this research,
As usual, we
and a
have to come
mechanism
up
for
with a problem
disseminating these
statement.
research findings.
And
So when they provide assistance to countries
from
such
the
as that,
statement, we
it
must come up with
strengthens
a
and creates
hypothesis,
sustainable development for those developing
propose
countries
the
in
nature of
regards
association
to how
between the variables.
the research findings have come out. And number two, provide financial assistance. Financial assistance is important in sustainable development law and practice because when we are formulating a sustainable development law, Tisamate ngele, let's say Muntogudi is, let's say, Ugandan or Australian, how are they going to formulate sustainable development related policies from a Malawian context? So providing financial assistance and providing support as well as research allows for individuals to be well formed and trained in areas of sustainable development and sustainable development law, and sustain their educational infrastructure as well as programs.
In order to
so this includes environment and public health system.
For you to make
consider avoiding frequent and serious financial constraints by many institutions of higher learning. So this has been considered as an area of implementation because higher learning institutions are the ones that impart the knowledge to the individuals. And finally, promote an appropriate, affordable access to programs for variable. So from developing countries. So this is because in a lot of underdeveloped countries, there are challenges in terms of education attainment and access to education because of financial control. And lastly, to take account significant legal development for the field of sustainable development. So again, that is through international cooperation, and providing
much
financial assistance. So these are the key areas of the Sustainable Development laws through the framework of Agenda 21 and the World Summit on Sustainable Development called the Joburg Plan of Implementation.
What that design is saying. Here you have an experimental research, and that you are going to randomly
Any
assign
questions this far?
the subjects to two groups, and you have the experimental group, the control group. You administer the treatment here, the teaching technique, no teaching technique, and you observe the performance at the end. We talked about those, so
okay, so the principles on sustainable development law were very clear.
Now,
but in terms of there are a lot of them, you can just focus
as I
on areas that are related to environmental conservation. Only those areas that are related to environmental conservation.
You have a sample.
So, for example, principle 1, 2, and 3. You can just focus on these three
to infer the results into a population. But whenever you come up with a sample, there is always some degree of error you will make from the sample. Let's say you had 2,000 students in 4th year at University of Freedom doing educational
sustainable development leadership.
Okay.
So this content is quite intense. So the areas that you should focus on.
You wanted to test the level.
The areas that you should focus on are, first of all, how you are integrating the leadership practices, the 23 leadership practices. So in reference, this diagram shows you 14 foundation practices, the higher level practices that, so the focus is that foundation practices are managerial focused, right? The higher level practices are employee focused, and the key performance drivers are customer focused. So when you're looking at all of this, it's a lot for someone to remember, right? So the thing that you have to remember is that what is it that a manager can do to ensure that sustainable development and sustainable practices are promoted in an institution? So you look at, for example, employing people who have the relevant skills, and having people who, developing individuals continuously. So that is the foundation practices 1, 2, and 3. And when you're looking at higher level practices, an individual has been employed in an institution. What practices would that person employ to ensure that they engage sustainability of that institution? Team player, right? It is a mechanism in which an employee is going to provide the most amount of
use a sample.
So we have, for example, a team orientation, and also they would ask something like the person who is a self-starter or who manages time well. So these are practices in which an employee can focus on to ensure sustainability of an institution. And finally, the customer focus. Quality as a customer focused driver is important in relation to how a customer is going to come back for the same product. If you continuously buy a product, mainly it is because of the quality of that particular product that satisfies the want that the students will be distributed. So these are the sustainable development practices as a summary, right? So you focus on the areas that I have mentioned.
And the mean of these students is going to be 80.
You also look at
The highest performer was going to get 95.
sustainable types of sustainable
The lowest performer
type of
will get
sustainable leadership.
65.
So you can look at, so when you are looking at this diagram,
That's the type of
it gives you the type of sustainable
distribution
leadership. It gives you a principle and mode of
you
action,
get from
right?
the population. We are assuming it.
So when you are making
In
reference to this table, you look at the sustainable leadership
group
type.
of students,
You look at the
there are
principle
those
in which that
low
sustainable leadership
performers,
type focuses on,
there are those
and the
very
mode of
high
action.
performers,
For example,
and there are those
moral
who are
leadership
average performers.
focuses on code of ethics.
But let's assume
So how
that
can
you took a
they
sample
focus or engage
of
moral
50
ethics in an
students
institution? So that is
from
through
this group.
setting examples for more rewards as
Okay.
well as punishments. So that is
And
an
somehow,
explanation of, for example,
from your
leadership.
sampling,
And that
those 50 students
table gives
came from
a summary
that
of
portion
the comparison between the
of the
sustainable
graph.
leadership practices in these few slides.
Right? You administer the exam.
Any questions?
They also give you some kind of a normal distribution, but the mean cannot be 88.
So on this is the
Because
areas
these guys,
that are going to be focused in the
their
exam.
performance is around.
And then you also have the environmental impact assessment. You can
60,
look at the several
70,
areas of environmental impact assessment, such as
70.
the advantages and the
So
disadvantages,
they are mean
and how environmental
to
impact
70.
assessment should be conducted.
They are below.
And finally,
And the
environmental and sustainable development.
the
This is
lowest
just
performer
an area of
got
focus that you
67.
look at. You
The highest performer
highlight
got
the elements of
75.
environmental conflict. So what this is that you should be
You have
able to
computed the mean?
explain why environmental
70.
conflict occurs.
Right?
So according to
From this
the literature here, it shows you,
What is this
for example,
story
why
telling you?
environmental,
You made an error
sustainable conflict
in the
occurs.
sampling.
You look at the issue of the,
And that's why there's a
the
difference between
sustainable
this mean and that
development
mean.
as a design
So,
and as an illusion.
every time you
So because
sample,
of these issues,
you
it
should
causes
know
sustainable
that
conflicts to
there is an error which
continuously occur
you are
because
likely
of the not
make
harmonizing the meaning
from
of sustainable
the
development.
population
So because of
parameter.
this, countries
This
can
is
use different meanings
a
and
sample statistic,
cause
yes?
environmental, sustainable
sample.
conflict in the
And
long
this,
run.
you remember, is in
And
the
we also
parameter
have the types of
mean of
environmental
the
conflict.
population.
So the types of
when you
environmental
conduct
conflict are specifically important when you are looking at
a sample
the
observation,
the
there's
approaches
always
to address environmental conflict.
a
So we looked at
true
the conflict
observation
resolution in that class, where I
plus
explained what would
an
be more
error.
effective
In this
as
example,
a type of sustainable
the
conflict
observation we made is
being addressed by the
70,
naturalistic conflict management
okay?
approach or
And this
the
70 is equal
naturalistic
to
conflict management approach.
80 plus an error, and the error
And
was
on the
minus
examination of the
10.
Malawian Environment Management Act, in this, you should look at the
So every time you
areas
use a
that
sample,
the Act
there's
looks at in regards
an
to regulation
which you
of
always
use of
make.
natural resources. And then
But let's
after that,
assume-
you make reference to the policy in action. So we have a case study of Malawi here,
In this scenario,
where the Environmental
it is also possible
Management
that
Act
you
of
could
Malawi has
come up with
enabled
a sample
the director
which is
to shut down
coming from this
specific
region,
factories that were producing
so the error you would get here
single-use
would be
plastics.
very close
So that is
to
the rest of
the actual observation. You could also end up
that is
sometimes
the rest of the course. So
having
zinazo
samples from this
just
area,
recently. It is just
and
this
maybe the error will be 0.
this document here
Because you
where
get
we're
the
looking at
situation where
module 4,
70
which has the challenges and priorities,
80 equals
action towards
80
sustainable
plus
global
error.
system. So that is environmental
But
conservation and control
the
and the role of indigenous
80
knowledge in environmental
equals
conservation.
80 minus
So
0
those are the areas of
to be 80,
focus.
right? And as you are seeing the distribution,
Are there
most
any
of the
questions?
samples would actually tend to come from this area, because that's where the majority of the people are. You remember with my area graph, there'll be 68% within this area, 95% within this area, and the further you go, there'll be only very few. but those errors will still occur. If you were to take so many samples from this population and did the same, administer the educational statistics test for each and computed the error, statistically, it has been found that those errors, there will be some errors which will be in the minus Z, but sometimes you get a sample where the mean is 90, and it is still 90, 90 is still equal to the actual population mean plus an error, which is the error is 10. Maybe some of them will get 79 equals 80 minus 1, plus minus 1. Some, as I said, you might find 80 equals 80 plus 0. Some 82 equals 80 plus 2. If you add these errors, if you had conducted, let's say, taken 100 samples and you kept on computing the means, if you add the errors, they will always add to 0, because there'll be those with negatives, those with positives. So the negatives and the positives always cancel. That's one statistical observation which has been found. I might forget this. So the sampling errors, the sampling errors have certain predictable characteristics, or they behave in a predictable manner. Mr. Pearson Demman goes to a garden without a hoe. So how were you going to do the farming? Oh, you have the hoe, but you are not farming, eh? Sitting in the garden, just daydreaming. So, when you are conducting inferential statistics, you know that you are dealing with some errors associated with your sample statistics. But those sampling errors behave in a predictable manner. And because of that predictable behavior, we can still use the sample statistics to estimate the population statistics. The predictable behaviors of the sampling errors, I think this, when I send it, take note of this slide. The predictable behaviors that sampling errors have are those four. One, what I was demonstrating here, if you taken 100 samples from that 2,000 samples of 50 students, and you computed the means, the sampling errors, these sampling errors, if you wanted to plot them or to compute a mean of just the sampling errors, okay? If you compute a mean of these sampling errors, That means you equal to 0. And the reason is what I was demonstrating here. The negatives will cancel with the positives. So that's one predictable behavior of sampling errors. The other predictable behavior of the sampling errors is coming from what I said on the other day on the golden rule of sampling. The larger the sample size, the more representative it is to the population. The smaller the sample size, the less representative to the population. So, if instead of taking 50 student samples, you decided to be taking 500 student samples, the sort of errors you will get here will be smaller. Okay? If you were taking 10 student samples instead of 50 student samples,